Hello, my name is John from Monostory, and today we're going to be talking about Shonen Jump and too many cancellations. So let's get into it and find out what it's all about.
Fighting鐘の音は響く心の中へと広く深く物語のような星の雫その中には何が起きても気分
Shonen Jump is a weekly series that has a lot of different manga in it, and every week they produce a different chapter for that manga series. It is well known for making some of the most popular anime and manga in the modern era, including such things as Dragon Ball, One Piece, Naruto, Bleach, Hunter x Hunter, and many, many more. However, this magazine also produces some of the worst manga that should be used as toilet paper when you're out there doing your business. And some titles just from this year alone include such things as Nice Prison, Embers, Ping Pong Peril, Kagami, Ekiden Bros, Beethoven, as well as a few others. And these stories were some of the worst stories I have seen in 2025. The reason these stories failed in Shonen Jump is that they didn't follow the formula that other stories have chosen that have made them some of the biggest successes around the world. A clear example of this would be if you were to talk about Dragon Ball, everyone would know what you're talking about, or One Piece, the same thing. Everyone will know what you're talking about. It may only be just the basic of being Luffy or talking about Zoro, but there is a connection between the name of the manga and the memories of many people around the world. And the big reason is that their premise is terrible. Nobody wants to read about a nice prison. Let's be honest here. You could have made it very good, but you made some 3-year-old's crayon drawing. There is so many things about that story that is terrible. It was DOA, and it was mainly built on its premise. The nice prison made no sense. You're cleaning up a prison, and the way you're going about doing it is in a comedic sense that brought in spoofs and funny characters that just fell flat. And it didn't help that you were in a prison where you couldn't change the scenery. So your premise of the story itself was terrible. Another idea of premise would be sports. And in Shonen Jump, we had 3 sports manga, and they all did terribly. Even Harukaze Mound, which is doing very well compared to the other 2, is still doing bad. And I mean, the other 2 did get cancelled. So, I mean, you're not doing any better, to be honest. Anything can do better than that, really. So, the problem being with these stories is that they're all bad premises. Let's go over one at a time for you. Harukaze Mound. How many other baseball manga are there out there? How many? You probably couldn't even count them on your fingers. There's too many of them. The next one, Ping Pong Peril. Okay, ping pong sounds interesting. What, you make it some zany, weird story that doesn't really reflect the sport of ping pong specifically. And your last one, Ekiden Bros. The only people that do running for a sport are people that go to the Olympics. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never met a person who's gone to the Olympics, let alone for running. Now, that doesn't mean that people don't do it for a hobby, but there's a difference between doing it for a hobby and then going full-fledged like you're going to be running 100 meters for a gold medal. And so being in that sort of environment, it's very hard for a normal person to find interest in that sort of story. So you're already cutting out most of the audience just through that premise alone. And to build on that, the characters do not work. They're all terrible, all the same, all look like trash. They have no value to the story whatsoever. Like in Nice Prison, main character, terrible, not likable, not funny, just terrible. And same thing can go for your Ekiden Bros. Your characters look horrendous and they do not look interesting whatsoever. One of also the biggest issues that most of these stories have is their backstory. Some of these characters we are meeting through the middle of their story, so we need to understand where they have come from and where they are going. So you need to know where they begun so you can actually follow them as the story is progressing, even though you are starting midway through their story. So an example of this would be, let's say again with Nice Prison, how we get a certain story about our character. Is that ever spoken about again? And the answer is no. And is this character's backstory even interesting? Again, no. So if you don't have a good backstory to our character and we are not starting from their beginning, we are starting from the middle, then I have no interest in this character because you haven't built them up for me to be focused on wanting them to achieve greatness or wanting them to fail, depending on what I like. And that's very important because if we take a very famous series like One Piece, one of the biggest backstories that we get is about a character named Robin. And originally in the Alabasta arc, we are told about her past, but we aren't really fully exposed to it. So we have a sort of mystery there, but it's also a way to understand the pain and suffering she has gone through. So it builds her character, but not to the extent where we are knowing the complete depth of her backstory and where she came from, meaning there is still something else out there to be learned, which we do learn about in the Water 7 and Enies Lobby arc. And this also works for Attack on Titan. Again, this character who we are following, named Eren, is given the opportunity to find out about everything from his father, who has a key to a place known as the basement. And for most of the story in its early infancy, we are hooked and drawn to this place called the basement, and that is what ties us to our characters, as we want to be able to get back further out from the walls to get to this basement and find out what Eren's father was hiding. And so that again brings us into the story, into the past, to the future, and it creates this really interesting dynamic where even characters that didn't reach that point, we feel sympathy for them because they were so close to getting what they desired. And the last big thing that most of these stories haven't done is they don't do any future planning because they are so focused on trying to stay within the magazine because they have created something that has no story, has no characters, and has no backstory. Then they're not able to plan for the future because there is no future for their story. So they are essentially running on borrowed time, where if they had just planned their story and had good connections, then their story would last. An example again clearly is Kagurabachi. It started off with a backstory and then it ties into the present story, and we are also given future plot points throughout the story that we do not understand until we get to that point of the story. So we could look at a very simple thing known as Magatsumi and the Master Swordsman, and how this early sealing of the sword is necessary because if you do touch the sword, Magatsumi, you might be consumed by the Master Swordsman. So it's very interesting how we have already some form of foresight by the writer of Kagurabachi to be able to understand how his story is going to work. And that tells us, as well as many other things within many good stories, that you have to plan for your future, even though you may be erased from the magazine. So how do we fix this problem that is currently going through Shonen Jump, and they're bringing in lots of series and then axing those series or deleting them? So the first point they should be looking at is screening their new manga more thoroughly, because they are going for the quantity over quality approach, which means they're just throwing things at a wall and hoping that they stick. And look, I know that they have a lot of money, so they can do this where they can just do whatever they really want, and maybe they'll find another gem like Gurubachi, Ichi the Witch, etc. But if they thought about it properly, the more eggs you throw at a wall, the longer it takes to clean. And the same thing goes for these series, where if they had just thought about them and given them more time, then they would be more palatable for everybody and people would enjoy them. But instead they thought, let's just put it in there, we trust our writers and we're going to just hope for the best. And clearly some of these series, like we'll go again, Nice Prison, that series should have never been produced. I did enjoy one chapter, which I think was chapter 9, but that was 9 chapters too late. And that goes for most of these series. They should never have been produced to begin with. They've wasted money and time and a spot that could have been given to somebody who actually knew what they were doing. The next big point is longevity of the series. So if you were again to look at Nice Prison, it's set in a prison. How long are you going to be in this prison doing these silly jokes? Same thing with Ping Pong Peril. How long are you going to be doing these zany matches that do not follow the regular ping pong formula? And Ekiden Bros, are you just going to be racing every chapter? Or are you going to be training for racing every chapter? Is there going to be anything outside of that? And how long can you do that before someone goes, didn't we see this in the last 10 chapters? Because there is very little that changes when you are running. Now, there might have been something that the writer had in mind was coming up for the story that made it unique, but in reality, you've already wasted so many people's time just on the first chapter because there's nothing unique about running. It's just your legs moving. You can make it intense, but people have done that with cars. People have done that with other forms of equipment to make races more interesting. And that ties into the next point. Make a story that's good and interesting. Nobody wants to read about running. Nobody wants to read about a nice prison. Nobody wants to read about playing the piano unless you're going to do it with a beautiful story. Like Beethoven is not the story you want. Your Lie in April, now that's a story that can play your piano and tell you someone went through a mental breakdown in the same story. And same thing goes for Embers. I already have Blue Lock. Why would I want to read Embers? This is the point. If you think about it, your story ain't interesting because there's something better. And unless you make it good, then it's just another clone of the original idea. And the last and most important point is how your characters can develop. Because we are the readers that want to see this character get stronger, succeed, become whatever we desire. If they're the villain, we want them to lose. If they're the hero, we want them to win. And it is the writer's job to make these characters something that we want to learn about and we want to enjoy viewing or reading about. And a very clear example of this is with Naruto. Everyone wants to see Naruto become the Hokage. In Bleach, we want to see Ichigo become the strongest he could ever possibly be. We want to see Luffy find the One Piece. We want to see so many characters get to their end point. That's the point of consuming these stories.
Weekly Shonen Jump. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that this magazine changed manga forever, especially in the West, with some of the most beloved and recognizable manga series being born from this unassuming weekly magazine.
And that is my thoughts on too many cancellations in Shonen Jump. And my opinion still stands that there are some of the worst stories of 2025 in Shonen Jump. And the way that they're going to fix this is very simple. Stop making DOA series, be more thorough and look at its future potential. If you can do that, then every story should be better, if not the best it can possibly be. One thing you need to keep in mind is that the story doesn't need to make a new wheel. It just needs to paint the wheel that's already there. You're in Shonen Jump. All you got to do is power-ups and fights and have 2 characters with a rivalry at some point, and you're set for maybe 100 chapters. That's it. Get some magical entity in there. Bam. Easy story. Think about it. Let's look at Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z. All you gotta do is 100 episodes of people fighting each other. That's it. And then you have that one episode with Master Roshi getting a blood nose for looking at the TV, looking at something he shouldn't be. Or let's take Naruto. You have most of the story with 2 ninjas or more going at it at each other with the sole objective of completing a mission of some sort. And then you have Shippuden with the Akatsuki and their power system. It doesn't get any easier. You're not in Katakawa, you're not in a shoujo, you're not in a story that's going to change the world. Like, you're not doing free rent here. You're doing a turn my brain off, punch 2 people in the face, and watch their heads explode. That's what you're supposed to be doing. I want ligament damage. I want people creating craters in the earth at that level of strength. And I want absolute carnage through power systems, whether it be magic, whether it be weapons. Whatever way you create your story, I want absolute devastation when 2 people get it on with their fighting abilities. That is what Shonen Jump is. You can have unique stories. Death Note is a clear example of that. War of the Adults, another example of that. You can do this in your magazine. There is nothing stopping you. But this is Shonen Jump. It is made for one thing and one thing only. Fights, action, and the most important thing, tournament arcs. But that is my opinion on Shonen Jump and their many cancellations. I want to hear what you think about Shonen Jump and what is your opinion on all of these cancellations. Did you like some of these manga that have been cancelled? And do you feel like they were treated unjustly compared to other manga? Please write that down in the comment section below. My name is John from Mono Story. If you haven't already liked, subscribe and press the bell button, please do so. And if you would like to watch another video, please click above. If not, until next time, I will see you on another Mono Story.